Our third speaker. Those of us at the Institute of Consciousness Research are always pleased to have our next speaker teach us something. Teri Degler, probably everybody knows the name Teri Degler, has for decades been writing on Tantra, yoga philosophy, creativity, mysticism, and kundalini-shakti. She's widely recognized as a writer and speaker. She's authored at least 12 books, and we at ICR think of her as our in-house author and teacher. Teri's latest and most monumental writing project has already been mentioned by Lawrence. It's a new biography of Pandit Gopi Krishna. It went to press just earlier this year. We all want to have that on our library shelf. I had the privilege of doing some proofing to help Teri, and it was a wonderful experience. The book is called Gopi Krishna, a Biography, Kundalini, Consciousness, and Our Evolution to Enlightenment. 299 wonderful pages. Teri's dedication and love for her subject came through both in the book and in all the work that she did in preparing the book. I asked her to share some factoids on all the work that it was involved in creating this important volume. She has superpowers, and I'll show you. She traveled to India, to Switzerland, to Britain, and both coasts of the US. She saw way too many airports and lost track of the miles that she traveled both in India and in California. Teri interviewed at least 20 people for probably 100 hours gathering information, and then corresponded with many more via email to harvest yet more details for the account. For better than 18 months, Teri buried herself in the diverse archives left behind by Pandit Gopi Krishna. She was searching for letters and notes to give her further insight into Pandit's work and thoughts. Then for nearly 2 years, Teri devoted her time to drafting, to redrafting, to refining and polishing her book. She definitely has superpowers. I asked Teri to tell us who she sees as her heroes and heroines, and I was excited to see that Nelson Mandela was on that list. But then a name came up I had to go and look up because I had forgotten it. Malala Yousafzai, the young and daring Pakistani activist and Nobel Prize winner. Teri does set her sights high. Teri will not always talk about the hard work she's done unless you ask, but she's always excited to tell us about gems of wisdom that she has uncovered while on her odyssey. She is going to surprise us again today with her talk on karma yoga. Teri, on behalf of everyone here, I welcome you, and I'll hand the conference over to you, and I'll let you know when your time is running short.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. That was really a wonderful introduction, and I really appreciate it. I hope it hasn't built things up too much.
No, we don't want to put pressure on.
Thanks for the pressure. I want to thank Patrick, Ted, Mike Bradford, who's behind the scenes there and gave us a wonderful introduction this morning. I also want to thank Lawrence and Anne, fabulous talks, and they've required both of them a lot of concentration. So hopefully the talk I'm going to do, we can relax a little bit and just think about some easy ways to talk about what they've been talking about, because there is some overlap, which is fascinating to me. One of the most fascinating things, how Lawrence came at all this from a tradition very similar to the tradition that I like to be immersed in, the one that sees Kundalini as the divine feminine, as the active force of the universe, and Shiva as consciousness. Now, Anne came at this and looked at it from Purusha and Prakriti, which are really different Hindu systems of looking at very much a very similar thing. And in fact, the tradition that Gopi Krishna talked about, that Lawrence was talking about, really has roots in Samkhya. So all this is really very, very relevant And I just love the way Anne talked about it in terms of how we can look at that in terms of psychology today. What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about Gopi Krishna biography, because my other books, and there really have been 12 of them, often I think of those as books that I wrote, right? But this book is really a book about Gopi Krishna. It's a book about his ideas. And one of the things about Institute for Consciousness Research that's so important is that although, yes, they promote Gopi Krishna's ideas and have been republishing these books and have just recently published the biography, they're really eclectic. And Gopi Krishna was really eclectic. He was always encouraging us to look at this, not from Gopi Krishna's point of view, but from all these different points of view and from all these different traditions. And so let me just start out, and I'm going to do some slide sharing, and I'm not going to do it nearly as efficiently or well as Lawrence and Anne did it, but I'm doing the best I can here. So let me just share my first screen here, and you will see what I mean when I say it's not as efficient, because my screen doesn't look as pretty as their screens did. But we have here a copy of the book. And again, I highly recommend this book. And again, not because I wrote it, but because it tells an amazing story of a profoundly spiritual life. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about Gopi Krishna for a minute. Again, within that context, that ICR does not promote Gopi Krishna as a guru. He was not a guru. He did not take followers. He did not form a spiritual movement. He was focused very much on spreading information about Kundalini, particularly to the science and medical communities, who he wanted to be aware of this profound spiritual transformative energy. And I'm going to talk about that for a minute. And I'm still screen sharing, so I can switch my screen here if this works. It worked. Okay. So the conference theme this year was really Kundalini consciousness and our evolution to enlightenment. And that's the subtitle of the book. And one of the most wonderful things about this, and everything actually that Lawrence talked about and Anne talked about, these all come together really in karma yoga, which is an amazing realization to me. So before we get to karma yoga, I would like to talk a little bit about what Kundalini is. Now, Lawrence and Michael earlier gave really beautiful, succinct definitions of this. And I want to just do something slightly different here. And let me just get another slide up here. And and they both mentioned this, but it's really important. And so I want to stress it for a minute. And this is that Kundalini is just a way of conceptualizing, a way of looking at what is a universal, transformative, spiritual energy, force, power. Every tradition has its version of Kundalini. And I believe personally, it's the same thing as Holy Spirit in the Christian tradition, Ruach HaKodesh in Jewish mysticism, Tumo fire in Tibetan Buddhism, Gem Chi in what's sometimes called Taoist yoga, or again, a very Asian Chinese tradition. So in this talk about Kundalini, let me just stop this share for a minute. So one of the things that we see going on right now in the world today is there's a tremendous upheaval. Things are in bad shape. We know it. I've been an environmental activist since the early 1970s, since 1971, actually. And a lot of this, and Anne mentioned this, as pollution, the dissolution of what we see around us in the world today, as opposed to the dissolution of ego. We see a lot of upheaval. And as a contrast to this, we see a lot of people talking today about transformation of consciousness. And there's an idea out there that the transformation of consciousness is what's going to happen out of this upheaval. And there have been a lot of spiritual leaders and speakers and thinkers from Nostradamus on that have talked about us going through a time of upheaval and coming out on the other side with transformed consciousness. Sorry about that. So if we look at that, talk about transformation of consciousness is out there today. What's missing is that people don't seem to be talking too much about how it happens, what triggers it, what's going to bring about that transformation of consciousness. And that brings us back to Kundalini. Kundalini is a trigger, it's a fuel, it's an energy, a force, a power. And all those other ways of looking at it equally are for the transformation of consciousness. And Michael said that much more succinctly this morning in his brief 10 minutes than I've said it right now. But it's good to think about this, that if we have a transformation of consciousness, how does it happen? How does it go about? And one of the interesting ways of using the yogic tradition or the Hindu tradition to look at this is because in terms of yoga, the idea is that Kundalini awakens us and transforms consciousness, but that it is a biological force. It's not just spiritual. It's rooted in the body. And these traditions of Hatha Yoga and Tantra tell us that it's in the body. And one of Gopi Krishna's ideas was we needed to understand this biological aspect of Kundalini. This doesn't make it less spiritual, and that's really, really important to understand. Kundalini does not become is not less spiritual because it's biologically based. It's just is, and we need to understand it in this way. So that gives us kind of an idea of what Gopi Krishna was talking about when he talked about Kundalini related to the transformation of consciousness. Now, I want to talk about Gopi Krishna here for a minute, and I'm going to go back to screen share if I do this right. Okay, again, I'm not doing it so smoothly as the other guys did. But here's a slide on Gopi Krishna. And this is a wonderful shot of him that I think kind of sums him up. Again, he was not a guru. He was not a spiritual leader in that sense that he formed a movement. And for me, this is really important because it gives for me anyway, it gives, sorry, excuse my squeaky voice. I've really been suffering with some kind of bad bug lately. So again, excuse the squeaky voice, but Gopi Krishna was really someone who, because he wasn't a spiritual leader in that sense of taking on disciples, for me, it says that we can trust what he was saying. He had no motivation for saying this stuff. He had no personal motivation. He wasn't forming a movement. He wasn't forming a lot of people to follow him. So anything he said came from a sense of real authority. And in a minute, I'm going to come back to his advice, which was very simply follow the tenets of your religion, which Anne talked about a lot, and we're going to come back to this. Live a moderate, balanced life and do karma yoga for an hour a day. That's it. That was it. So let's look at this and what I want to say his authority was, why he was able to say this, how he said this. This is a quote from a talk he did. It's available as an ebook called The Last Discourses. And he did happen to do this talk in Toronto. But he said, I do not see the world as I did before my 34th year. I live, I eat, I drink, I sleep in a world of light, living light. For me, this room, and he was looking out on the room, this room is full of intelligence. He was looking at a room and he was seeing living, pulsating intelligence, alive, cosmic living intelligence. And Anne talked about this beautifully, this state of being able to see that. How do we get to that state? We'll talk about this more in a minute with karma yoga. He went on to say, on this side of the curtain is light and life and happiness, Sat Chit Ananda, an ocean of life. On one side, eternity. On the other side, the universe as we know it. So whatever I say, this is Gopi Krishna saying, whatever I say, every word that I utter, what I present to the world is the result of knowledge gained from this side of the curtain. To me, that's true authority. In terms of yoga tradition, we would call this a state of jivan muktaha, the state of living liberation. And that meant that Gopi Krishna was a jivan mukti, a person who was able to go from this state of living light to the state of ordinary consciousness. Speak to us from this state of ordinary consciousness, what he was seeing over here in this state of living light. Again, very much what Anne was talking about, these higher states of consciousness that are the purpose of the Yoga Sutras, and as if she said, of Theravada Buddhism, what we're trying to reach this state. So again, let's stop the share. Anne talked about the yamas and the niyas right at the end of the talk, and I was going to talk about them now. I don't have to talk about them so much because she did. But what Pandit was saying, and he often was called Pandit, he wouldn't let people call him Shri Shri or Guruji or Babaji or any of those guru-ish names. But he did, not that there was anything wrong with them, but he didn't want to take them on. But he did allow us to call him Pandit or Panditji, and that's just from the tradition of Kashmiri Shaivism, where he was honored people were called Pandits. And he, it could also just mean Mr. So he did let us call him Panditji. But when Pandit was talking about the yamas and niyamas, or following the tenets of your religion, I want to be very careful about that, because sometimes people today, particularly, we see a strand of real fanaticism in following the tenets of religion, whether it's I'm not even going to name them. Every single religion, we're seeing this today, a tendency to fanaticism. And he wasn't talking about that. He was talking about following the basic tenets. And those are basically the yamas and niyamas of the Yoga Sutras. And we see them in the, let's go back to a screen share again. It's working. And we see it. Oh, it didn't go. There, we got it. In the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 16, verse 2 and 3, actually in verse 1 too, but mostly in verses 2 and 3. It's same thing as the yamas and the niyas. Same thing as those principles of paramitas. I said that wrong, I think, but Anne was discussing it in detail. So nonviolence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, peacefulness, absence of slander, compassion for all beings, freedom from longing, humility, forgiveness, fortitude, detachment. And yamas and niyamas, she said them so well, but a few of the important ones: non-harming, non-violence, truthfulness, very, very important, truthfulness, not stealing, greedlessness, devotion to God, compassion. And again, she summed that really well about devotion to God. Whatever we see as the divine, putting our mind to the divine. So it's easy to see the similarities. And excuse me again, my voice is so rough right now. Easy to see the similarities with the 10 Commandments, and particularly with Christianity's 2 great commandments, which were love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy spirit. It's translated very different ways, but that's one way. The basis is love God with your whole being. The second is like unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself. That's amazing, because if we do those 2 things, we take care of all the yamas and the niyamas. We take care of the 10 Commandments. We take care of all the precepts of Buddhism. We take care of the Bhagavad Gita's advice for what a divine being would be. So stop the screen share for just a minute. We take care of all those things in just those 2 commandments. And we're going to come back to them again. And remember what we said Gopi Krishna's advice was: follow the tenets of your religion, but just those 2. Loving kindness, compassion, nonviolence. Just do that. Just do unto others what you would have them do unto you. And we're going to come back to that idea too. So follow the tenets of your religion, live a moderate, balanced life, be content with what you have. Live a simple life. And what is it? Gandhi's often quoted with saying, live simply so that others may simply live. Not quite sure where that quote came from, but it's a brilliant one. Live simply so that others may simply live. Here in this Western world of North America and Europe, we have so much. We live in such opulence. We have so much that we can give. And we are just a small, tiny, maybe 10% of what the world is today. So what was Gopi Krishna's third advice? Karma yoga. Karma yoga has a long history and touched on it. Lawrence touched on it, and Lawrence touched on it more even in his behavior. What was he doing when he went out to those prisons to speak to people, to speak to convicts? That was karma yoga. And again, from its earliest origins, karma yoga didn't have that meaning, but it's certainly what it means today. And it's certainly what Gopi Krishna meant when he said practice karma yoga. He meant practice, be of service to humankind. I'm going to go back to my screen share again. I'm just really hoping I keep this going. And these are, Patrick mentioned some of the year and a half, at least, I spent reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of Gopi Krishna's correspondence between him and between other people. Now, these correspondence is all archived. It's not available to the public. It's archived in a library in Zurich, Switzerland. And Institute for Consciousness Research also has a copy of the archive, but the archives are not available to the public. What I did in these archives and what I did with the book was I took as many gems from these letters as I possibly could. And we've got a 300-page book. I would have put more of them in. Even if you can't access the archives, you can access a lot of these gems of wisdom from his correspondence in that book. And a lot of this stuff isn't in his books that he wrote and were published by major publishers. They're just in these letters. Here's one he wrote to a woman named, well, you can kind of see it marked out there. I say it's Christine because you can kind of see it says Christine, but I say, dear C. She had written wanting to know more. She was having these profound spiritual experiences. Again, she was calling them kundalini experiences. I would call them spiritual experiences of any kind, any type of profound spiritual experience. And she was wondering what they were and how she could further them. This is what Gopi Krishna said. He said, the first essential, he said, the real secret of success in yoga. And by that, he meant in the real secret of success in spiritual practice. And let's just jump down here too. In other words, one on the spiritual path has to purge his mind of the common human failings. Exactly what Anne was talking about. Preparing the mind. Exactly what's in the Yoga Sutras, the yamas and niyamas. Preparing ourselves for later experiences, for later work in yoga and asana and pranayama that come later on. First, we prepare ourselves on the spiritual path of the common human failings. Here we look here in the letter, I'll just point it out here. Greed, jealousy, malice, envy, cruelty, hate, and the like. And to cultivate the divine properties, the opposites, cultivate them. Contentment, charity, dispassion, humility, love for all human beings, loving kindness. That's compassion. Until on and on it is able to reflect the eternal light, the culmination of what Anne and Lawrence were talking about. When it says it here, that's the mind. So the mind is able to reflect the eternal light. How do we do that? He came back again and again to say, if you're not there, practice them. Of course, we're not there yet. Of course, we're not at the place where we have no anger, where we're truthful all the time. We're not there yet. It's a lifetime work. And Anne said that so well. Lauren said it too. It's a lifetime work. How do we get there? Practice them. Pretend like you're there. Work like you're there. And what's the easiest way to do that? Karma yoga. Even an hour a day. And I just want to talk a minute about the title of my talk, which I said was Karma Yoga Calisthenics. Okay, we do not need to do yoga, calisthenics in any kind of yoga. And I call my talk that sort of because it's one of my great bugaboos, is that we are doing yoga. And when we talk about yoga today, we're really talking about physical yoga. We're talking about asanas. That's just one aspect of yoga, but it's come to mean that in the West today. We're doing it like calisthenics. We're forgetting that it is part of a spiritual practice. And we're also forgetting that we needed to be ready to do that, to get there. We needed to have a good grounding in yamas and niyamas. Are we there perfectly? No, we're not sattvic beings that Anne talked about, walking around full of loving kindness, radiating nothing. Like, we're not there. We're just not. I'm certainly not. And I doubt if many people watch. Somebody out there maybe watching is in that state. It would be rare. So how do we get there? One of the fastest ways is practicing karma yoga. It helps us get there. It helps us do that purification process. So I want to go back to my screen sharing. Oh, you can see how nervous I am about this. Okay, sorry. So we had Christine's letter, and we're going to come back to some of these letters now. So I picked out 3 letters from the archives where Gopi Krishna talks about karma yoga. He talked about this all over the place. He recommended it, and even just an hour a day. So if we were doing karma yoga calisthenics, we'd be Nelson Mandela, we'd be Gandhi, we'd be even people that are coming up today. Greta Thunberg, look at these young people she's dedicating her life to educating people about climate change. This kid started out at like 8 years old trying to reform her family. Amazing. This is karma yoga calisthenics. We don't need to do that. It's great if you can, if you're going to be a Malala Yousafzai and dedicate your life to it, good for you. But if you can't, if you can just do it an hour a day. Think though, that adds up to 7 hours a week. That's almost a day of karma yoga. Listen to what he says. This was a letter to someone named Jim, who many of us know. Jim was writing him again about, how do we do this? How do I have success in yoga? How do I have success in the spiritual path? So are we back? So yeah, we're showing the letter here. Okay, so I managed to highlight it here. It said, to my mind, this is Gopi Krishna speaking to this guy named Jim. To my mind, there is no other way to achieve success in our efforts for spiritual unfoldment. In our efforts for spiritual unfoldment. So easy, so safe, and so short as karma yoga. Or in other words, the way of service for other human beings in whatever way we can render it, in whatever way we can render it without any idea of self. So this is a trick in this thing of karma yoga, is that in a way we're doing it, and let me stop the share here again for a second. In a way, we're doing karma yoga because it benefits ourselves. It furthers us on the spiritual path. And yet, we do it without expecting that. And this, we go right back to the Bhagavad Gita. Karma yoga in the Bhagavad Gita, karma it's action. It's the yoga of action. It's the yoga of doing. This is way back in the early history of karma yoga. Karma is just a Sanskrit word. Kar comes from the root kar, which means action. And Anne described it very well. Lawrence had some really good words to say about it too. But how it's meant today is this yoga of selfless service. Selfless, even though at some level we know it's benefiting us, Let's put it out to be selfless. And one way we can do that is to put it out and say, okay, I'm doing this for others. I'm just doing it for others, and try to forget about the self. This is the dissolution of the ego that Anne talked about. Forget about self. Just think of doing it for others. Don't even think about it. Just go out and do it. Don't worry about the other stuff. Okay. And I'm going to give you a couple more of his letters here. Sure. Okay. We're going to go back here. This is Sri Koti. I want the letter from Anne. This is the letter to Christine. Sorry. So that letter that I talked about earlier, just a couple slides ago, where we talked about his advice on living the yamas and niyamas. She comes back, she wants more information, and he comes back and he says, this is karma yoga. This is real service to mankind. This is karma yoga. We've got it here. It's yellowed out in the slide here. This is karma yoga, the yoga of selfless service for the aspirants of God. So he put some emphasis on this, on helping others that were on the spiritual path. Gopi Krishna did emphasize this a bit, but he went right past that also and says, for the poor and the needy. So selfless service for those who need it, for the needy. All prophets and sages have laid the greatest emphasis on this. This yoga of service is the shortest cut to achieve success in the realm of the spirit. Our shortcut. We're looking at that. And let's just look at one more letter. And I want to talk about this. This was a guy, this is really interesting story. Because in the, if you go back in the archives, and you can find the letters that this Mr. K, Sri K, wrote to Gopi Krishna. He had a profound spiritual experience, which he put in terms of kundalini experience, because he was a Hindu and someone interested in the yogic tradition. And his profound spiritual inspiration, and remember, again, both the speakers have talked about this today, characteristics of what happens on these spiritual experiences. Some of the characteristics are that they have, it's just profoundly spiritual, called a mystical experience. It's an experience of love, of light, of bliss, of oneness, even if it's just a momentary experience of it. Mystical experiences in all traditions. And it's no coincidence that the mystics of every single spiritual tradition have talked about their experiences using exactly those terms. And I've spent the last 40 years researching this and writing about it. You can see it in my book, The Fiery Muse, or in The Divine Feminine Fire. I talk about this. These are the experiences of all the mystics, of all the traditions. And one of Gopi Krishna's points was, look, it's got to be a universal energy. It's causing these same experiences all over the place. And one of the third things is the development of siddhis, what are called siddhis in yoga, what are called charisms in Christianity. And the charisms are really spiritual abilities, spiritual, I want to say paranormal experiences. The word paranormal packs a lot of baggage with it. But these are spiritual experiences of the other word, abilities that come along. And it's often said by later spiritual teachers that when these siddhis appear on the spiritual path, whether they're clairvoyance, or you might begin to have dreams that are a bit premonitory. You have a dream and you know what's going to happen. The phone rings and you know who it is. You have a deep intuition of a way you should go in life, something you should do, and it turns out that was correct. Those, we can look at those as paranormal. They're beyond the normal. They're supranormal. They're opening this other channel of perception that Michael talked about so perfectly this morning. Another channel in the brain, often referred to as the Brahmarandra, this other channel opens. It's an organ of perception, and we see the world in this world of light that Gopi Krishna talked about, that Anne talked about, that Lawrence talked about, Mike talked about today already. A world of light. We're seeing another reality, this sattvic reality. So that is the other the perception changes. An organ in the brain, biologically based. It's okay that it's biologically based. That doesn't make it less spiritual. It lets us see this world the way it really is. So one of the characteristics of this, besides increased intuition, increased clairvoyance, we might say, increased ability in our dreams, one of these is divinely inspired creativity. And I've made a lifetime search of looking into the great mystics and sages from different traditions, where it was Rumi, who was Islamic. Rumi was a Muslim. He was a Sufi Muslim. So Sufi, Muslim, Islamic tradition, Rumi, what happened to him? He burst forth with poetry. He wrote poetry that is still affecting us centuries later, still putting people on the spiritual path. So this Saint Teresa wrote reams. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, again, she had experiences in art, in music, and she wrote the first morality play. Can you believe that? It's 12th century Christian mystic wrote the first morality play as part of a spiritual awakening. So on to this. So those two books, Fiery Muse and Divine Feminine Fire, deal with that a lot. This gentleman, Sri K, in this letter that we're looking at now, wrote to Gopi Krishna because part of his spiritual transformative experience, and its transformation is what we're talking about here, part of his transformative experience when he was suddenly gifted with the ability of, I don't know how to say it, musical ability. He could sing. He knew songs. He could spontaneously pour music out of him. He could spontaneously sing the devotional songs of Hinduism. Had no ability whatsoever. And we're seeing this a lot with people. And one of the reasons I spent a lot of time writing about it is that we're seeing this with people on the spiritual path today, or don't even know you're on a spiritual path. As Anne said, it happened totally spontaneously. You're tootling along, and all of a sudden, you have this experience of something beyond you, and a poem pours out of you. It just pours out, and you scroll it down as fast as you can. And you read it later, and you go, that's beautiful. I wrote that. I can't believe it. And 9 times out of 10, it's some insight into spiritual progress, into spiritual awareness, into seeing this other side of the world that the mystics of all traditions were telling us exists. What Gopi Krishna was saying, on the other side of the curtain, that world of light. So you might just be tootling along through your life and get a poem, or you might get a song. All of a sudden it comes to you. How many musicians, from Leonard Cohen to Sting, wrote about this? Just came to me, just had a song poured out. This is the awakening of this transformative energy within us. So Mr. Koti, Sri Koti here. Oops, I wasn't supposed to say his name, Sri K. Forget that I said that. Mr. K, many years ago, 1982, wrote to Gopi Krishna, talked about this experience of light, of music. And Gopi Krishna dictated this letter back to him. And you'll notice he talks about Kundalini in terms of the mother. So the mother, and Lawrence used these terms before, the mother, the divine mother. This is this way of looking at kundalini-shakti, is looking at nature, prakriti, which is another word for nature, active nature, as the divine mother. And I love this term because I think of Mother Earth. And I know this tags me as an old aging hippie here. But to think about Mother Earth, this manifestation of the divine feminine, So he had this manifestation of the divine feminine that came to him as music. And when he wrote to Gopi Krishna, he wrote about it like that. He said, the divine mother has gifted me. The divine mother has given me this. And this is, so when Pandit wrote back to him, he used those terms of the mother to explain why the letter is written in these terms. And he says, the mother, here, let's look at this. We're screen sharing. So we've got this here. The mother who has granted you the boon will also show you the path. The mother who has granted you the boon will also show you the path which you should follow to make the best use of it. One who is gifted by heaven, and this was more often Gopi Krishna would use the word heaven, the gift of heaven. Gifted by heaven should not entertain high ambitions of becoming known and honored because of it. Now, this doesn't mean you're not going to become known or honored because of your gift. In a minute, I'm going to talk about Karen Armstrong. She's certainly somebody who's become known and honored vastly because of this gift that she's been given. So it can happen. It may happen. It may not. The important thing is to listen to the divine guidance within with what you're given. You're given that poem. Does that mean you should walk off and leave your family and exist in a state of sattvic light? Doesn't mean that. Gopi Krishna goes on and says no. And I'll finish the rest of the letter and say this. He said, humbly wait for divine guidance. I'll put the marker there, to use it for the greatest benefit of humanity. The powers gifted by the mother have a certain condition attached to them, which is that they must be used for the performance of karma yoga. Right back to karma yoga. They must be used for the performance of karma yoga. That is as a means of serving our fellow human beings. And he goes on now and touched on this, the tradition in yoga that someone reached higher state of consciousness, totally lived in that light that Gopi Krishna lived in, and then walked away, became what was called a renunciate, and lived as a samana in the woods, as a renunciate, as a hermit in the woods, with nothing but a begging bowl, holding the begging bowl out, and people would come by and put rice in the begging bowl for you. To live as a renunciate. This option came to Gopi Krishna. He was highly tempted to become a renunciate, to just live in that state of light. It was more beautiful, more transcendent, more filled with love, more filled with joy, with bliss than anything in the human imagination. But as Jivan Mukti, he turned away from that. And think of these great spiritual masters of the past, Muhammad, Christ, Buddha. They lived in that state of consciousness, but they also lived in the world. They brought that knowledge back to humanity. And this is really important. If we look at divine inspired creativity, if you look at it on one end as a poem that pops in your mind, a painting that comes to you, a song that comes to you, ability that comes to you. And way at the farther end of that, what we have is revelation, divine revelation. This is divine inspiration, comes from a poem clear to the other end. We have the teachings of Buddha, the teachings of Christ, the teachings of Moses. This was divine revelation. So what Gopi Krishna is saying here is, yes, you might even be getting divine revelation. You might be living in that world of light. He says, Mr. K, do not walk away from your family. Listen, here goes back to the letter. In view of the fact that you have a family to support, it would not be in accordance with the principles of karma yoga to abandon them to their fate. But the attempt should be made to shoulder the full responsibility, and talked about that a lot, shouldering the responsibility of the household, and at the same time, to use the time available after this is done in service to the Lord and fellow human beings, in service to God, in service to the mother. whether it's Mother Earth or the Divine Mother. Service to those who are on the spiritual path, and in fact, service to all spiritual beings. So when we think of that, go back then to those two great commandments: love God, devotion to God. You read the Bhagavad Gita, this is what it's about. Is it the crux of the Bhagavad Gita is that there's three kinds of yoga. There's karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, and the highest is bhakti yoga, which is devotion to God, devotion to the divine. But for me, if you look at it and you look at those two great commandments, love thy neighbor as thyself, love God with all your heart, you practice it in karma yoga. And this was the brilliance of Gopi Krishna. He was like, yeah, it comes together in karma yoga. That is devotion. Because if you see everything as one, and this is something all the great mystics have said to us, from Sufi Muslims like Rumi to Christians like Saint Hildegard, that there's oneness, that we exist beyond that veil, beyond that curtain, in a state of oneness. We are all one. So it's loving kindness to all beings, everything is one. So we come back to that and we have it in just so simple, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If you're in a state of misery, don't you want somebody to help you? Don't you want someone to practice karma yoga and reach out a hand to you? Of course you do. That's what you want. And just so you know, I'm not making this up. Gopi Krishna wasn't alone. This is an amazing thing. We're going to go back to share. Oh, click, click. I'm doing it. Is it working? There it is. Look at this poster. This is the Golden Rule poster. This is amazing. This is a wonderful. And we need a shout out to an acquaintance and I would call friend of mine, Tina Petrova, who did a lot of work on this poster. And it was put together by a mission in Scarborough, Ontario, right here in Canada, a Catholic mission, an association of Catholic priests who did all the work to put this poster together. And you look at it, and every single world tradition is represented on here, and it tells you their version of the golden rule. It is everywhere. It's all we have to do. And if we look at the golden rule, what is it but karma yoga? It's doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. And one of my favorites on this poster over here is Judaism, because this is by Hillel, and the commentary on the Torah, or the Talmud, he was one of the great commentators of all, one of the greatest respected commentators on the Torah. And this is what he says. It's a little small. You can't read it, I don't think, on your screen, but I'll read it to you. He says, what is hateful to you, do not do that to your neighbor. What is hateful to you, don't do that to your neighbor. Then he went on to say, this is the whole Torah. All else is commentary. There it is. All else is commentary. Karma yoga, do unto others. And I want to talk here about, I'm still screen sharing so I can scoot this up. And I'm back.
Can you do it in 5 minutes?
5 minutes, I can do it. I'm winding up. This is perfect. Okay, right. Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong won a big award with $100,000. And what did she do? She went out and created a compassion website. You can tune into Karen Armstrong, and she's written many books. Brilliant scholar, brilliant woman, brilliant human being. The compassion website. And one of her books, this is from one of her books called 12 Steps to a More Compassionate Life. She says, all faiths insist that compassion is the test of true spirituality, and that brings us into relation with the transcendence we call God, Brahman, Nirvana, Tao. The transcendence we call the divine, whatever we call it, the transcendent force, whether we call it Kundalini, Holy Spirit, HaKodesh, Shekinah, Shakti, Sophia, Divine Mother, the trigger that brings us into this state of transcendence. And how we practice it an hour a day. And if you don't think you can do it an hour a day, listen to our next speaker, who is Michelle Howell. She's a mother of 5 children, a farmer, and has won awards for her work on food equity, sharing food awareness, sharing nutrition with the world. If she can do it an hour a day, and she doesn't more than an hour a day, but if she can do it with 5 kids and running a farm, you can do it an hour a day, I guarantee you. Okay, and with my last slide, I share this because I didn't tell the story of Gopi Krishna telling the story again and again. He said, be the older brother, be the elder brother. If a big brother is by a stream, what does he do? He picks up his little brother and carries him across the stream. And here we've got somebody carrying a little brother across the stream. And again, at the very end of our book, I'll flash it up again. At the very end of our book, he has a quote, and I think I probably have, I'm just going to go over a minute if I do this. The book's published by ICR. You can order it on Amazon. Libraries can order it from Ingram's. Contact me at teridegler.com and we can talk more about this. I'll answer your questions if I can. This is the last paragraph of the book. He said, be the elder brother. What is essential is love, is good action, is service, is truth. That can keep you better from distraction than even meditation. Help. Be the elder brother. That is not only on an individual basis, but on a racial basis also. The elder brother has to help. The stronger brother has to help the weaker. Where do we get this idea from? It comes from the divine. What life do we have to live? Our life has to be full of health. The race is evolving. It cannot evolve if we were all selfish. It can only evolve, transform. This is the transformation of consciousness that everybody's talking about. It can only evolve if the strong help the weak, the wise, the fool, the healthy, the ill. And here we are, North America and Western world, the rich, the poor. It can only evolve them. That is the teaching of all religions of mankind. We have not understood the importance of the teachings of Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism, but this is the law. Since the race is evolving, transforming, it cannot transform unless those who are first to move ahead bring their other fellow beings along. And I just want to stop the share and thank you all for an opportunity to be here and talk about karma yoga. I hope I've kicked you in the butt a little bit and you can go out and find, if you're not already doing it, and I know many of you are already practicing, even dedicating your whole lives to karma yoga. If not, if the best you can do is give your money to Doctors Without Borders or Amnesty International or Oxfam or Canadian Feed the Children, that's one thing. But go beyond that. An hour a day, be of service in whatever little way you can. And it transforms you, then makes you more able to help transform the world, makes you part of that big whole transformation of consciousness that's going on around us. It's not happening just accidentally. It is happening with purpose. The divine is pushing us through to help others. So thank you all for an opportunity to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you on behalf of everybody, Teri.
Thank you.
This conference this year has been really very distinctive in the sense that we're not talking about just Kundalini. We're talking about our responsibility to live the life. And the karma yoga is quite a different point of view.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.